Long ago, in the peaceful village of Umeketa, surrounded by wide farmland and whispering palm trees, lived a young man named Chinedu. He was tall, with kind eyes and hands hardened by honest work. Every morning before the sun rose, Chinedu was already in his fields, planting, weeding, and praying for rain. He wasn't rich, but everyone respected him. They said, "Chinedu may not have gold, but his heart is worth more than silver." He lived alone, in a small mud brick house that he had built with his own hands. His parents had passed on when he was a teenager, and from that moment, Chinedu learned how to be a man the hard way. He had one dream, to one day build a home filled with love. Not just walls and a roof, but warmth, laughter, and peace. That dream began to take shape the day Amora arrived. She was the new teacher posted to Umeketa Primary School. Tall, graceful, and confident, Amora wore modern clothes and carried herself like someone from the city. Her voice was soft like music, and when she smiled, even the toughest farmer in the village forgot his troubles. The first time Chinedu saw her, he was delivering yams to the school kitchen. Their eyes met. She nodded politely. He greeted her with a respectful bow, his heart pounding for a reason he couldn't explain. From that day, something inside Chinedu changed. He found reasons to pass by the school, to help carry books, to drop off vegetables. And Amora. She noticed. She wasn't used to that kind of attention, quiet, respectful, and real. No flashy words. No games. Just a man who showed he cared through actions, not empty promises. One Saturday, there was a community cleanup at the market square. Villagers gathered with hoes and brooms. Amora arrived late, looking unsure. Most of the women stared at her, some with envy, others with judgment. "City girl," they whispered. "Let's see if she can hold a broom." But Chinedu walked up to her and said gently, "Here, let me show you the best way to sweep this path. You'll be better than all of us by the time we finish." She laughed, the kind of laugh that makes a man forget the weight of the world. From that day, they became friends. They sat under mango trees after school. He brought her roasted plantain and groundnuts. She told him about life in Enugu, where she grew up. He told her about his dreams of owning large farmland and raising children who would never know hunger. Amora was surprised by how thoughtful Chinedu was. Unlike the men she knew in the city, he listened. He cared. And slowly, her heart opened to him. Soon, the entire village knew what was happening. Old Momankechi, the village matchmaker, was the first to say it aloud. "Love is dancing in their eyes," she said, "and when love starts dancing, wedding bells are never far behind." Months passed, and during the village yam festival, Chinedu did something bold. In front of the entire village, as drums beat and dancers moved, he walked up to Amora, went down on one knee, and held up a ring made of braided gold wire and red beads. "Amora, I may not have riches, but I have love. I may not have many clothes, but I will always clothe you in honor. I may not have a mansion, but I will build you a home with laughter and joy. Will you marry me?" The crowd held its breath. Amora looked at him, this dusty, humble man with strong hands and an even stronger heart. She smiled, then said, "Yes, Chinedu. I will marry you." The drums roared louder. People cheered. Women ululated. Some even cried. The wedding was simple but beautiful. The elders gave their blessings, the youth danced all night, and the village drank palm wine until sunrise. After the wedding, Chinedu changed. Not in a bad way, but in a way that only true love can bring out in a man. He started waking up even earlier. He expanded his farm, planting more cassava, maize, and pepper. He began supplying to nearby towns. Whatever he earned, he gave to Amora. She wanted to start a small boutique. He paid the rent. She needed new clothes to look good in the city. He found the money. She wanted a television, generator, and even a freezer. Chinedu made it happen. He stopped spending on himself. No new clothes. No new shoes. Not even the goat he had been saving up to buy for Christmas meat. When Okoro, his childhood friend, asked him why he was giving everything to Amora, Chinedu smiled and said, "She is my joy. If she shines, then I shine." But not everyone was happy. Old Mama Nkechi warned him gently one evening. "My son," she said, "love is sweet, but it must have balance. A bird does not fly with one wing. Be careful not to carry everything while she carries nothing." Chinedu thanked her, but in his heart, he believed something different. "She loves me," he said to himself. "And I trust her. One day, when the storm comes, she will carry me the same way I have carried her." But storms don't send a warning before they arrive. And sometimes, the people we carry through fire are the ones who throw water on us when we are finally burning. The seeds of something painful had already been planted. But Chinedu didn't know yet. He was still dreaming. Still loving with his whole chest. Still giving everything, until the truth would break him. From the day Chinedu married Amora, his life became centered on one thing, her happiness. He worked harder than ever. While other men woke up with the crow of the cock, Chinedu was already on his farm before the stars faded from the sky. The soil became his best friend, and sweat poured from his body like rain. Every evening, he returned home carrying food, fruits, firewood, or small gifts for Amora. He would stop at the tailor's shop to sew her new dresses. He sent her airtime and always bought her favorite roasted corn when passing the roadside women. Amora didn't lack anything. Chinedu even started attending local farming workshops. He wanted to learn modern methods so he could earn more, grow more, give more. Soon, his farm doubled in size. He began to supply to markets in neighboring villages. With his profits, he took a loan and bought a motorcycle to make transport easier. He paid off her boutique rent 2 years in advance and helped her stock it with fine clothes, perfumes, shoes, and handbags from Onitsha. She no longer needed to go to school to teach. "You deserve to rest and focus on your dreams," Chinedu told her proudly. "Let me carry the burden for us." Amora smiled and nodded. "Thank you," she said. But deep inside, she had started seeing things differently. She had tasted freedom, power, and the admiration of customers who called her madam. She liked the way people looked at her boutique and whispered, "See that big shop? It belongs to Chinedu's wife." But Amora started forgetting who built it all. As time passed, something began to change in her. She no longer sat outside with Chinedu in the evenings like they used to. She started coming home late, claiming she was counting stock or meeting customers. She stopped cooking. Chinedu didn't complain. He simply cooked for both of them after returning from the farm, even when his back ached. He would knock softly on the bedroom door with a tray in hand and say, "My queen, I made yam porridge. Come and eat." Sometimes she came. Sometimes she didn't. When his mother came visiting from the village, Amora barely said a word to her. She stayed locked inside her room, claiming headache. Chinedu apologized on her behalf, trying to cover the cracks with love. "Maybe she's just tired," he said. One day, Chinedu sat with his friend Okoro, under the mango tree at the village square. Okoro, who sold spare parts in the market, looked concerned. "Brother," he said, "I won't lie to you. I'm beginning to fear for you. Are you sure your wife still values all your sacrifice?" Chinedu took a deep breath. "She's just adjusting," he replied. "I believe in her." But even as he spoke, there was a small shadow creeping into his heart. Things got worse when Chinedu's farm started struggling. The rains came late that year. Pests destroyed his maize crop. Then one evening, thieves stole 2 bags of harvested cassava he had left out to dry. He lost a big contract from a food processing company because he couldn't deliver on time. Still, He did not let Amora feel the weight. He sold his motorcycle to pay house rent and keep her boutique running. When she said she wanted to renovate the shop and paint it pink, he took a loan from a local moneylender at high interest just to please her. He never told her about the loan. To her, life was smooth. New clothes. Fresh hairstyles. New shoes every month. Weekend trips to the city. To Chinedu, life was becoming a storm. He wore the same old slippers every day. His trousers were torn at the pocket, but he stitched them quietly at night. He stopped going out with friends. He barely ate 3 meals a day. Yet he smiled through it all. Because in his mind, he believed, this is what a man does for love. Then came the day that broke him just a little more. It was a Sunday morning. Chinedu had gone to the village church early, leaving Amora at home. When he returned, he noticed her phone buzzing on the table. He ignored it at first. But then a message popped up. He didn't mean to look, but his eyes caught something. Thanks for last night, babe. You were fire. Let's do it again next weekend. I miss you already. Red heart, Casey. Chinedu stood frozen. Casey. Who was Casey? He sat down, holding the phone, heart pounding, sweat pouring from his forehead. Amora walked in from the kitchen. When she saw him holding her phone, her eyes widened for a moment, then she laughed. Oh. So you now check my phone like a child, she said, folding her arms. Chinedu didn't answer. His lips were dry. Amora, he whispered, who is Casey? He shrugged. A friend. Chinedu stood up slowly. A friend that thanks you for last night. A friend that says you were fire. She rolled her eyes. Why are you behaving like a woman? So you don't trust me again? After everything you've done, you think you own me? Chinedu blinked in shock. I've sacrificed my sweat, my blood, my peace for you, he said, barely able to breathe. She picked up her phone and scoffed. Well, that's your problem. And with that, she walked away. That night, Chinedu sat outside under the moonlight. His eyes were red. Not from anger, but from pain. The stars were silent. The crickets sang their usual songs. But everything felt strange. He remembered his mother's warning. Okoro's advice. The words he once told himself, one day, when the storm comes, she will carry me the same way I carried her. But now, the storm had come. And instead of being carried, he was being crushed. He looked at the small fire burning beside him and whispered. What did I do wrong, Lord? I gave her everything. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning. The storm was not over. And the truth would break him even more. After that Sunday, something broke inside Chinedu. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It didn't come with thunder or tears. It was silent. Like a man who gets wounded deep inside but smiles anyway so no one will ask questions. Chinedu kept waking up early. He still went to his farm. He still came home with firewood, fresh vegetables, or roasted groundnuts, but something had changed. He no longer laughed as much. His eyes no longer sparkled. His back was a little more bent. Even the birds that usually followed him around in the morning seemed confused. Was this the same man who used to sing while digging his soil? Who used to whistle as he chased squirrels from his yam barn? No. This was a man who had loved too deeply, and now was quietly drowning in that love. Meanwhile, Amara grew colder. She walked past Chinedu in the house as if he was furniture. She hardly cooked. When he returned from the farm, she barely greeted him. She began spending weekends in the city. She said she had business meetings. Chinedu never asked. He didn't want more pain. He simply nodded. When she returned, she came with new shoes, perfumes, and handbags. But she never brought anything for him, not even chewing gum. One night, as Chinedu lay on the bamboo mat beside their bed, he heard her speaking on the phone. She thought he was asleep. No, forget him. He's just a farmer. No class. No dreams, she whispered and laughed. He's not even ambitious. I'm just managing him for now. Chinedu squeezed his eyes shut, praying the pain would go away. But it didn't. Then came the final blow. The moneylender who gave Chinedu the loan for Amora's boutique came to the house. He wasn't smiling. Chinedu, I've been patient. You're 2 months late. If I don't see my money by next week, I'll go to the elders, he warned. Chinedu begged for more time. That night, he turned to Amora in bed. My love, he said, please, can you help me pay just part of the loan? I'll pay you back as soon as harvest comes in. Amora didn't even turn to face him. I didn't borrow the money. That's your problem, she replied coldly. Chinedu blinked in disbelief. But the money was for your shop. She stood up, took her pillow, and moved to the sitting room. Don't disturb me, I beg. A few days later, Chinedu's crops were hit by a heavy storm. The wind destroyed half of his farm. He had nothing left. He sat on a stone beside the collapsed yam barn and wept for the first time in years. Tears soaked his shirt. Not because of the farm, but because the one person he gave everything to had given up on him. Soon, whispers started in the village. People noticed Amara's sharp tongue, her disrespect, and her new friend who picked her up in a big jeep on weekends. Old Momankechi said one day at the market, I warned him. Love is sweet, but love without sense is poison. But Chinedu didn't care about the whispers anymore. His only concern was survival. He stopped farming full-time and started doing odd jobs, digging wells, clearing bush paths, carrying sand at construction sites. Amora mocked him. So now you are a laborer, she scoffed one morning as he left with a shovel. Your mates are opening companies, but you are digging holes. He didn't reply. He just walked away with his head low and his heart heavy. One night, he returned home to find a letter on the table. It was a notice of separation. Amora had gone to her lawyer. She wanted him out of the house. The house that he paid for, he built, he furnished. Chinedu sat on the floor for hours, staring at the paper. Then he looked around the house, the curtains, the chairs, the pictures on the wall. All the memories. All the love. All the hope. Gone. He packed a small bag. Just clothes. Nothing else. Before leaving, he went to their bedroom. Amora was painting her nails. I'm going, he said softly. She didn't look up. I know. I just want to say, thank you for the memories. She scoffed. Keep your sentiment. Chinedu smiled sadly and walked out. He didn't know where he was going. He just kept walking. His heart broken. His pockets empty. But his spirit not dead. Not yet. Because somewhere deep inside, something was waking up. A seed of strength. Of dignity. Of quiet revenge, not with fist or insult. But with rice. And in the silence of that night, as crickets chirped and the moon looked down on a heartbroken man, the ancestors whispered. Let them mock you now. But your story is not yet over. Chinedu walked through the night with nowhere to go. The village paths were quiet, and the moonlight guided his bare feet like a gentle spirit. His heart was shattered, but his legs kept moving, one step at a time. By dawn, he arrived at the house of his childhood friend, Ibuka, a kind-hearted mechanic who lived near the edge of the village. Ibuka opened the door and froze when he saw him. Chinedu, he asked, shocked. What happened to you? You look like a ghost. Chinedu couldn't speak. He just fell to his knees and wept, loud, painful tears that carried years of sacrifice, betrayal, and shame. Ibuka pulled him up gently. "Come inside, my brother. You'll be fine. You're not alone." That day, Chinedu lay on a thin mat in Ibuka's living room, staring at the ceiling. Everything he had built was gone, his farm, his home, his marriage. But most of all, his trust. He kept asking himself, "How did I get here? I gave her everything, why wasn't it enough?" The next morning, Ibuka placed a bowl of hot yam porridge beside him. "Eat," he said. "I know your heart is broken, but your life is not over. Stand up. Let's go to the workshop today. Just come and sit. You can start learning. It's time to rebuild." Chinedu hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Okay." So, day by day, Chinedu started learning the mechanic trade. At first, he just passed tools. Then he started loosening bolts, fixing tires, changing engine oil. He listened, watched, and learned with quiet focus. People in the village were shocked. "Is that not Chinedu the farmer? And he's now fixing bikes. After all the money he spent on that woman. Chai! What a fall." But Chinedu didn't answer them. He smiled when they mocked him. He greeted them with respect. He stayed humble. The same way he once gave everything to his wife, he now gave himself fully to this new path. Meanwhile, back at the boutique, Amara was enjoying her freedom. She told everyone she was now a single woman. She went to parties, posted pictures on Facebook, and shared quotes like, "A woman must do what is best for her. Never settle for less." She didn't know that her actions had started turning people against her. Even her close friends began whispering, "That woman. She chased her husband out because of small money and fine shoes. She doesn't even respect herself. One man this weekend, another man the next." One day, her new big man boyfriend disappeared with money she had borrowed to restock her shop. He stopped picking her calls and blocked her on WhatsApp. Amara began to panic. Her business slowed down. Customers stopped coming. People were talking. But her pride was louder than her shame. She told everyone, "It's just temporary. I'm still the boss lady." Back in Ebuka's workshop, something special happened. One afternoon, as Chinedu fixed a customer's tricycle, a woman passed by with a small boy limping beside her. The boy's leg braces were loose. Chinedu noticed and paused his work. "Mama, wait. Let me help your son." She was surprised. "You know how to fix leg braces?" He smiled. "I can try." He used wire, a rubber strap, and bits from his toolbox to repair the braces gently. When the boy walked again, more stable, more confident, the woman's eyes filled with tears. She thanked him and walked away quietly. The next day, she returned. Not just as a customer, but with a gift. Her name was Mama Ifioma, and she was a widow who sold palm oil in a neighboring town. She said, "You helped my son without asking for money. People like you are rare." She handed him a brown envelope. Chinedu opened it. It was 200,000 Nigerian nairas. He gasped. "Mama, I can't take this." But she insisted. "Use it to buy your own tools. Start your own life. Let the good you sowed return to you." Chinedu cried. But this time, it wasn't from pain. It was the beginning of healing. With Ibuka's support, Chinedu started his own mechanic shop near the main road. It was small, just a wooden shed with a metal sign, but it was his. Customers began to come. At first, slowly. Then more. Then more. They said, "He's quiet, but he's honest. He doesn't cheat people. He's the one that helped Mama Ifeoma's son. He fixed my bike for free when I had no money." Within months, Chinidu's name became respected again. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a man who rose from ashes. One day, as he cleaned his greasy hands outside the shop, a taxi stopped near the shed. The door opened. His heart skipped. It was Amara. She stepped out, looking pale, thinner, and not as proud as before. She walked slowly, holding her bag like a visitor who wasn't sure if she was welcome. "Chinidu," she said softly. He didn't speak. He just looked at her. "I heard, you have your own shop now. People say you're doing well." He nodded. She looked down. "I came to say, I'm sorry." Silence. Long silence. Then Chinidu said calmly, "Amora, you left me when I needed you the most. Now that I've found myself again, I can't carry your apology like a trophy." She looked at him, eyes wide. "I gave you everything," he continued. "And you broke me. But you also made me strong. So I forgive you. But I've moved on." Then he turned back to his shop. That night, Chinidu walked home under the stars. The same path where he once walked in tears was now lit with quiet strength. He whispered to the wind, "I lost everything, but I found myself." And for the first time in a long while, he smiled, a real smile. Because sometimes, the breaking point is not the end, it is the beginning of a new rise. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks rolled into months. Chinidu was no longer just a man trying to survive, he had become a symbol of strength. The villagers, who once pitied him, now pointed at his shop with pride. "That's Chinidu's place," they said. "The man who rose from nothing. The man who forgave, but didn't forget. The man who was broken but didn't stay broken." His small mechanic shed grew into a full workshop. He hired 2 boys from the village, Emeka and Tochi, and trained them with patience and kindness. He fixed bikes, cars, sewing machines, even generators. People from neighboring villages came looking for him. His name was no longer whispered in shame, it was spoken with respect. One afternoon, as he rested under the mango tree near his shop, a young girl in a school uniform approached him. "Uncle Chinidu, please, my mother said you helped her once. She said you fixed my brother's leg braces. She said you are a good man." Chinidu smiled gently. "What's your name?" "Ifeoma," she replied shyly. He nodded. "I remember. How is your brother now?" "He can run now," she said proudly. "He even beat me in a race last week." Chinidu laughed. She held out a paper. "My school is doing a career day. Can you come and talk to us about your work? Teacher said we should invite someone we admire." Chinidu blinked. "Him? Speak in a school?" He looked at the paper again, smiled, and said, "Tell your teacher I'll be there." That Friday, Chinidu stood in front of over 60 school children in neat uniforms. He wore a clean shirt and polished shoes. He told them about the power of hard work, humility, and rising after falling. He didn't speak fancy English. He didn't tell big stories. He said things like, "The world may break you, but you don't have to stay broken. A real man is not the one who has never fallen. A real man is the one who rises after falling, even when nobody helps him up. Never let pain make you bitter. Let it make you wiser." When he finished speaking, the children clapped. The teachers clapped. Even some of the parents in the back wiped tears from their eyes. Afterward, the school principal approached him. "Chinidu," he said, "you may not have gone to university, but you have more wisdom than many professors. We are proud of you." That evening, as Chinidu walked back to his shop, he saw someone waiting by the roadside. It was a woman, calm, gentle-looking, with a baby strapped on her back and a bag of oranges in her hand. She smiled when she saw him. "Good evening," she greeted. He smiled back. "Good evening. Do I know you?" Not yet, she replied. But I know you. Her name was Eudora. She was a widow, just like Mama Ifioma, and she sold oranges and palm oil to support her baby daughter. She had heard about Chinedu from everyone in the village. They talked for a few minutes. Then the next day, she brought her broken grinding machine to his shop. He fixed it for free. Then she brought roasted groundnuts. Then he helped her repair her old wheelbarrow. And before anyone could explain it, something gentle began to grow between them. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. One evening, as they sat under the same mango tree, Eudora said quietly, "You've been through so much, yet you're still kind." Chinedu looked at her, then at the fading sun, and said, "I gave everything to the wrong person. But maybe that pain was preparing me for the right one." Eudora smiled. They didn't speak for a while. But silence felt like music. Meanwhile, life was not so bright for Amora. After her big city boyfriend ran off with her money, things began to fall apart. Her boutique closed. Her customers vanished. People stopped picking her calls. She sold her gold jewelry to pay rent and started borrowing from friends, most of whom had already seen through her. One evening, she sat alone in the dark, with no electricity, no food, and only one pair of slippers by the door. She whispered to herself, "I had a man who gave me everything, and I thought I could do better." Tears rolled down her face. But this time, there was no Chinedu to wipe them. Back in the village, something beautiful was happening. Chinedu had opened a small foundation with part of his savings. It was called the Rise Again Foundation. Its mission was simple. Train young men in trades. Give small tools to struggling workers. Support widows and orphan children with basic needs. People were shocked. "Chinedu? A foundation?" "Yes," he replied. "I know how it feels to lose everything. Now I want to help others rise too." On the day his workshop turned 1 year old, the villagers gathered to celebrate him. They brought gifts, eggs, yams, kola nuts, baskets of fruits. Even the elders came. And when the village chief stood to speak, he said, "This man was once mocked. He was once rejected. But he turned his pain into power. His fall became his foundation. His scars became his strength. Today, we honor Chinedu, not because he is rich, but because he is wise." Everyone clapped. Eudora sat at the front, holding her baby. She looked at Chinedu and whispered, "You're a good man. And you didn't let bitterness win." That night, as the moon smiled down on the village, Chinedu stood alone in front of his shop. He looked at the stars and said softly, "The seeds of my redemption were planted in my tears. But now, they are blooming." And the wind carried his words far and wide. Because when a man rises with humility, even the sky opens up to honor him. The sun rose gently over Umeketa village, lighting up the roofs, the trees, the dusty paths, and the name everyone now spoke with honor. Chinedu. The same man who once walked the streets with a broken heart and a plastic bag now rode a small blue car with his name boldly written on the side. Chinedu Auto Works. Children waved when they saw him. Market women smiled and shouted, "Our son is back." He greeted everyone with humility. No pride. No noise. But everyone knew the king had returned. His workshop was thriving. He had 4 apprentices under him now. One of them, Tochi, had just opened his own mini shed with Chinedu's help. Another, Sodiq, had started night classes to go back to school, also sponsored by Chinedu. He didn't just rise for himself. He lifted others too. The community recognized this. And so, on the morning of the village youth summit, Chinedu was invited to give the keynote speech. He almost said no. "I'm not a speaker," he told Eudora, who now visited his home often, sometimes with hot soup, sometimes with nothing but her smile. She touched his shoulder gently and said, "You don't need big grammar. Just speak from your heart." So he did. The town hall was packed. Young boys sat with wide eyes. Mothers came with notebooks. Even old men leaned in to listen. Chinedu walked up in a clean white shirt and black sandals. He held the microphone, paused, then began. "I once gave everything to someone who didn't value me. I was left with nothing. No money. No home. No respect." He looked up. No shame in his eyes. "But pain taught me something no school can teach. It taught me to rebuild. To rise. To believe again even when no one else believed in me." He paused. The room was silent. "Today, I have peace. Not because I have everything, but because I now know who I am." Thunderous applause followed. Some people wept. Others nodded, as if to say, "This is what true greatness looks like." When the event ended, Chinedu stepped outside into the warm sunlight. A small hand tapped him on the leg. It was a little girl with bright eyes and tiny braids. "Uncle Chinedu, my mommy said you're a real king." He smiled and lifted her into his arms. "Tell your mommy I said thank you." The girl giggled. Her mother stood nearby, clapping softly. It was moments like that, simple, quiet, sincere, that made Chinedu feel richer than he had ever felt before. Meanwhile, Amara was sinking. Her boutique was gone. Her big men had vanished. Her clothes were worn. Her heart was tired. She tried to start afresh in the city, but nothing worked. Everywhere she turned, she faced shame and rejection. One evening, she returned to Umeketa, not with pride, but with desperation. She brought along her 3 children, Chinedu's children. The ones she had once kept away from him. She stood in front of his shop, trembling. Chinedu stepped outside when he saw the car. Their eyes met. She lowered hers and said, I brought the children. They need you." He looked at the girls, tired, dusty, wearing sandals too small for their feet. His heart softened. "Where have you been all this time?" he asked. She sniffed. Struggling. "I begged you once to let them stay with me. You refused. I thought I was enough," she replied. He looked at the girls again. They looked just like him, especially the eldest, Kayamika. He opened his arms. "Come here, my daughters." They ran to him and hugged him tight. They didn't care about the past. They just missed their father. Amara stepped back and wiped her tears. "Can they stay with you?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes. They are my blood." She looked at him hopefully. "And me?" Chinedu looked at her gently. "I forgave you a long time ago, Amara. But forgiveness doesn't mean we must start again. My heart has moved forward. I wish you peace, but I cannot walk backward." She nodded slowly. "I understand." That evening, Chinedu brought his daughters home. Edeora helped bathe them, fed them rice and stew, and tucked them into bed. Chinedu stood by the doorway, watching. She looked up and smiled. "They are beautiful." He nodded. "They are." Then, quietly, he said, "Edeora, will you help me raise them?" She smiled gently and replied, "I already started." And in that moment, Chinedu knew. The storm that once broke him had now passed. And from the ruins, a new kingdom had risen. He wasn't just the man who was once betrayed. He was the man who rebuilt. The man who forgave. The man who rose. 2 years later, the name Chinedu had become more than just a man's name in Umeketa, it had become a symbol of strength. Every young boy in the village wanted to be like him. Every elder in the community used him as an example. Even the chief's son once said, If I can live with half the dignity Chinedu has, I'll be proud. Chinedu was no longer just the mechanic. He was now the owner of a chain of workshops in 3 villages. He had trained over 15 young men and given each of them the tools to start their own lives. His foundation had sent 10 children back to school. He donated farm tools to widows, built a borehole for the village, and gave soft loans to struggling fathers. But most importantly, he built a home. A real one. Not just with bricks and cement, but with love, peace, and laughter. In a quiet compound surrounded by mango trees, Chinedu now lived with Edeora, the woman who stood by him when he had nothing, and their children. He had officially married her in a beautiful but humble traditional ceremony. His daughters from Amora lived with them too. Edeora treated them like her own. The girls called her a mommy. And when anyone asked Chinedu if it felt strange, he simply smiled and said, "Family is not who gives birth, it is who gives love." One Saturday afternoon, Chinedu sat under his favorite mango tree, holding a journal Edeora had gifted him. He opened the first page. Inside, she had written, "To the man who gave everything, lost it all, and still became more. You are not just my husband. You are proof that broken men can rise again." He closed the book slowly and looked at the sky. There were no clouds. Only sunshine. And in that moment, Chinedu realized something. He had lived through betrayal and found peace. He had been rejected and found acceptance. He had been brought low and then lifted by grace. Then came a knock at the gate. It was Amara. She looked thinner, older, but calmer. She greeted him respectfully. "I came to say thank you," she said. Chinedu nodded. "For what?" "For taking care of our daughters. For forgiving me. For not poisoning their hearts against me." He nodded again. She looked down at her hands. "I used to think money was everything. I thought love was about comfort, not character. I was wrong." Silence. Then she added, "I hope one day, they grow up to be like you." Chinedu looked at her. "They will grow to be better than both of us," he said gently. "Because now, they've seen the truth." She wiped her tears and turned to leave. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she replied. "Truly, Chinedu, you're not the same man I left." He nodded and whispered as she walked away. "That man died the day you broke him. But from his ashes, a better man was born." That night, as the stars glittered above Umeketa, Chinedu sat outside with his daughters and Adora's baby on his lap. They laughed as Edora told a funny story about a goat that stole bread from her shop. The children roared in laughter. Chinedu smiled. Not the smile of a man who had everything, but the smile of a man who had enough. Final words from the storyteller. In life, we all face storms, betrayal, loss, pain. But true strength is not in avoiding them. It's in surviving them and rising again. Chinedu gave his wife everything, and the truth broke him. But in the end, the truth also rebuilt him. Let this story remind you, even if you are broken today, with time, courage, and grace, you can become whole again.